So ideally today, I want to set the tone for what to expect. We're going to go through the digestive process. We're going to link it to the digestive products. Digestion is many things. One is not exciting. Two is a little bit dry, but here's what I keep saying. If you know this process inside and out, you can rationalize how to connect digestion to every practitioner, no matter what they're doing. Susan's talking about someone with Crohn's. Does helping a Crohn's patient with digestion help? Yeah, kind of a big deal, right? Someone with autoimmunity. Does it help? Absolutely, because that has a very strong link to what basically goes on in the digestive system. So today we're going to focus on all the products that help you break down your food. We're going to focus on the step-by-step process, get to know the organs of digestion, get to know the process of all the 3 major macronutrients, and then we're going to link it to the products at the end. So I thought this was kind of interesting. We don't really appreciate just how much work our GI system does for us, right? Because the whole goal is to break down matter, food, to sustain matter, us. So the reason we eat and digest is so we can take the constituents of what nature creates, incorporate them into our bodies, which then become our cells. I think that's a really important point to kind of reiterate, right? So garbage in, garbage in. Garbage in, garbage out. It's a fancy way of saying the food and the quality of food matters, but the ability for you to break down and properly assimilate and incorporate those nutrients into our tissues is really the process of sustaining health. And what pushes you in the other direction is likely some kind of compromise step in that process that gets a little bit of momentum that generates more and more and more power over the course of weeks, months, and years until finally your body can't compensate anymore. So in the average person's lifetime, so the average lifespan in the US is 78.8 years. Your GI system will process over 73,000 pounds of food. Just think about that for a sec. Think about the food choices people are making and what their GI systems are having to process, possibly without the assistance of having adequate enzyme output. The gut in a single day will produce between 3 to 4 liters, and considering I'm the only Canadian here, switching it over to imperial is about 1 gallon of gastric juices. Funny, all medical references are in metric, and then I have to make them imperial in my head, but I've gotten really good at calculating the price of gas. And a normal mixed meal requires a production of 720,000, there we go, there's an extra 0 there, lipase units. Which basically means that every time you eat a mixed meal of proteins, carbs, and fats, your body needs to produce that many lipases alone. So you can see how evolutionarily conserved enzymes really are in terms of helping you facilitate this breakdown process. I wanted to think about how we can characterize the necessity of focusing on the digestive system and digestion in any condition. So I looked at 3 things that are actually very common occurrences in people that in many cases probably go undiagnosed. Or there are things that people have that they would have no idea of in the first place. So the first one is called EPI. It's basically a condition where the body's ability to produce enzymes is fully inadequate. So no matter what the body does due to some kind of inflammatory condition, mitochondrial dysfunction, viral infection, typically you have pancreatic inflammation, and 1/2 of the pancreas's job is to produce insulin and glucagon. The other half is to produce pancreatic enzymes, and it takes that cue from the stomach. So if someone has an issue producing enzymes, then that step of the process where the pancreas secretes the enzymes to interact with the food becomes entirely compromised. And what's the issue? Insufficiency of absorption. So that's one thing. Most people suffering from some kind of chronic degenerative inflammatory condition or anything that's impacting energy production, mitochondrial dysfunction, chronic fatigue, likely has this scenario. And you can actually look at this in functional lab testing when you run like a stool test. And you can look at pancreatic elastase, for example. And that's a really good way of someone determining my client needs help with pancreatic insufficiency. The second thing is dysautonomia. And I can say this from personal experience. Most people who have some kind of viral infection, bacterial infection, could be an old head injury, an inflammatory insult, their nervous system does not communicate properly. They're kind of stuck in a fight or flight, and their ability to recruit, rest, and digest isn't quite up to snuff. Why does that matter? Well, the only nerve in the autonomic nervous system that innervates every organ of digestion is the vagus nerve. And if the vagus nerve isn't able to properly signal all of those pancreatic secretions HCl in the stomach, enzymes in the pancreas, bile in the liver and gallbladder. Everything becomes compromised because the signaling mechanisms have been compromised themselves. They are potentially broken. So if someone has some kind of condition that drives an inflammatory insult, inflammation is always fight or flight because the body's trying to do something to put out the fire. What does that mean? It's a rationale for why all people suffering from some kind of chronic degenerative inflammatory condition need to help support digestion. Because to overwhelm the inflammation and heal the tissues, you need to bring the nutrients back into the body. It's a circle of life, not to sound too much like the Lion King. And then the last aspect is the gut barrier function. So if you have leaky gut, everyone here knows that leaky gut is inflammation. And it's inflammation typically driven from some kind of dysbiotic, infectious, infestive is probably the proper term for fungal infestation, something that's driving a problem with the gut barrier. So we're going to look at a diagram later that shows you what the gut barrier looks like. But not a lot of people remember that the gut barrier is the last step of digestion. It's what takes these little peptide amino acid sequences and cuts them up into individual amino acids, or it's what breaks carbohydrates fully down into simple sugars. There are enzymes that the gut barrier is supposed to produce that if it is inflamed, it cannot properly produce. So what's the common theme here among all of these? I'm going to ask someone to give me an answer to make sure I know that I communicated this whole philosophy properly. It's the one common theme among all these examples that I put forth. Jason, you can't answer.
Digestion. We need to digest our food.
Yeah, and there is a large swath of scenarios where no one would think that the digestive system would be compromised as a result of something going on, but it's taking its cues from the rest of the body. And it's a very, very simple formula. If your health is compromised, it's likely to assume your gut and your digestion is compromised. And the question is chicken or the egg, what came first?
Yeah. And this is why functional neurologists just hammer on the vagus nerve with their gargling, that they'll even recommend coffee enemas, and also HCl and digestive enzymes also stimulate that vagus nerve, which is just huge. So you see it even in neurology.
Yeah, when we're looking at supporting digestion, what are we actually doing as an action? We're replacing a lack of secretions. So enzyme and HCl is a proxy or a substitute for what the body can't produce. Ideally, we can heal someone and their body can do it all on their own. That would be a pie in the sky idea. But the problem is, and Jason and I discussed this on a podcast we did earlier this week, the average person by the time they're probably 21 to 25 has some degree of enzymatic deficiency in terms of their ability to produce. So in my mind, it's a strong rationale as to why you should in some way, shape or form support digestion ongoingly if you want to maintain your health. Because it gives you a wider bandwidth of people to talk to. You have your sick people who are just really compromised. But hey, I'm not sick. I want to stay healthy. How do I do it? Keep your digestion strong. It's never going to fail you.
Well, like we talked about on that podcast too, everyone's just chasing that next shiny little thing. And, it's peptides, this, and all that stuff is great. But guess what? You make your own peptides if you're digesting your food properly. Imagine that. So
I know.
It's just trying to get this message through is, well, I remember when I first started, I'm like, this is going to be the easiest thing to teach people how to do. And boy, was I ever wrong.
What a beautiful segue with peptides in the stomach. So
right.
I'm sure most people have heard me beat this to death. We're going to do it again. If you do not start with the initial phase of digestion, meaning if that initial phase isn't optimized, the rest of the cascade becomes compromised. Why? Because this is the principal site of protein digestion. The stomach process is very energy intensive, and the lower the pH, the more acidic the environment. So besides being able to activate pepsinogen, so our protein splitting enzymes become active, we can make sure that we properly denature and start unraveling the complex folds of proteins. An acidic stomach does a few other things. It helps to kill foreign pathogens. So if you wanted to go down to Mexico and you're brave enough to drink the water or eat the salad that was washed in that water, God hope you have enough stomach acid to kill whatever wants to get into your system. And there are some other things that people don't necessarily instantly think of when it comes to the stomach. If you have B12 deficiency, that could be an issue with low stomach acid. Why? Because your stomach acid being low enough produces this compound called intrinsic factor. And its only job is to bind B12 and transport B12 into your bloodstream. Same thing with anemia. If someone has low iron, it might not be that they don't eat enough red meat. or spinach or whatever they're eating. It might be that their iron binding proteins, which need a very acidic stomach, aren't functioning properly. Because the body doesn't do anything by accident. You know, the pH has been chosen consciously because everything is optimized to operate at that pH range. And the last thing that's a really important point to hit on is there's something called the acid trigger. So after the stomach, we go to the pancreas. If the pH of what's coming out of your stomach is not acidic enough, then the feedback mechanism that regulates the amount of bicarbonate, the amount of enzymes, the amount of bile that gets secreted also becomes a little bit compromised. So if food comes out of the stomach alkaline, you've already kind of, you know, pardon my language, messed up the process. I was going to say a different one, but I realized.
Right.
So the fundamental thing is we have to start with the stomach, and tying into the stomach is why HCl support is a foundational piece. The initial phase of organ function when it comes to digestion is what sets the tone for the next part of the process, which is what we spoke about before with a condition like EPI. Because the pancreas and the gallbladder kind of team up to do a few things. Food comes out of the stomach acidic. So if that acidic food goes into your small intestine, that could be very damaging for the tissues of the small intestine. So the pancreas secretes something called bicarbonate. And bicarbonate is alkaline. And if anyone remembers the relationship between alkalinity and acidity, what happens when you introduce an alkaline medium to a very acidic medium?
Salt.
What's that?
Salt.
Yes. So you alter the pH so you become a little bit more neutral, or in this case, still acidic, but a lot less so to damage. But pop quiz for someone, why do you still want to maintain a very optimal pH range after stomach digestion? It's typically around, I don't know, between 4.5 to 5.5, give or take. Jeff Thurston, you cannot answer this question.
To continue producing bacteria.
There we go.
Support your organs.
Hold on, go it again. Say it again.
Help support your organs.
Yes, but what in relation to enzymes? So Misty already got 5 fantasy points. Bethany for another 5 fantasy points. Why is pH such an important aspect of enzyme function?
Or to create the peptides that.
One step prior.
No idea, actually.
So enzymes are pH dependent. So the reason we have an enzyme range of pH 1 to 12 in our supplements is that we can have enzymes that operate across the entire spectrum of pH. How the body is designed it is the stomach is very acidic. So pepsin is the only enzyme that's really active in the stomach. When that food becomes neutralized and more alkaline, what does the pancreas do? It secretes a whole bunch of protein digesting enzymes, carbohydrate digesting enzymes, and fat digesting enzymes that are designed to work in an optimal pH range. So this is why it's so important to hit on pH when it comes to enzyme function and digestion.
And many at different pH ranges too. So that's why we have different forms of protease. It's because of the pH range. So to try to mimic the body as much as you possibly can.
Because go ahead.
What is the optimal range then for someone?
So the optimal range the body would choose when the food's coming out of the stomach is 1.5 to 3. Then when the pancreas hits it with bicarbonate and enzymes, it becomes closer to neutral, probably somewhere around 5 to 6 or 4.5 to 5.5.
So
go ahead.
Sorry. Was what Jason was just saying, like why we utilize, like you said, just different types because certain ones won't hit at certain pHs. So to get a broader range.
Exactly. Okay. Yes. You want to specify a broad range because why would that matter? If we're dealing with a person with compromised digestion, they're not going to be hitting those ideal pH ranges. A lack of stomach acid will make it too alkaline. A lack of bicarbonate may make it too acidic. So the natural digestive process stops working, which is where supplemental enzymes come in. They pick up the slack that the body can no longer support. That's what we're attempting to do, because if you don't digest, you essentially ferment. And if anyone has ever been in a gym near bodybuilders who have undigested protein going into their colons, that positive nitrogen balance can peel the paint off of walls. Never do that in an elevator, by the way. It's just mean. So the pancreas is basically the next major step of the process because we've gone from food being almost whole into the stomach, protein being initially digested. Now that food has been broken up mechanically and chemically, all of the enzymes from the pancreas can work in conjunction with the gallbladder, which secretes bile, and bile's main job is to emulsify fat. So we'll go over this again. Pancreas secretes enzymes, gallbladder secretes bile. The reason bile is there is if you don't have bile, you can't break fats down very well. We'll get into the specificity of what that looks like afterwards. But bile also does something else. Two major things. Bile is a stimulant for contraction of food moving through the small intestine. So it helps stimulate food moving through the rest of the system so it can be absorbed properly. And bile also acts as a way to keep the small intestine cleansed. SIBO, or bacterial overgrowth, very commonly occurs when people have issues with low bile production. That's a liver problem, that's a gallbladder problem. Ties into stuff that's probably different in terms of source of origin, like parasites, viruses, gallstones, what have you, calcium buildup. But fundamentally, if we don't have proper pancreatic function, if we don't have proper gallbladder function, the next step of the digestive process becomes compromised. And we can get into secondary bile acids and how they help, rebuild our microbiome on another one. And then the whole goal of stomach, pancreas, gallbladder is to get to this process here. The small intestine, which is the main site of absorption. Does anyone remember how long the small intestine is in terms of its start to end foot length?
21 feet.
23 feet.
26. Close. But think about that for a second. This sausage of 26 feet worth of intestinal tract is designed to do one thing: maximize absorption potential. It's why if you spread out our GI system, it would cover two tennis courts in terms of its actual surface area. And the whole goal is to allow the villi and the microvilli, those little finger-like projections, to interact with the food slurry that we've hopefully digested properly. And those molecules are being split into their smallest possible constituents, and they're being digested through the epithelial cells. So that's transcellular absorption. Leaky gut is paracellular. So the whole idea is that this process works well. So all of these little structure and functional pieces, if you look on the right-hand side at that little, it looks kind of like a finger, right? It's got the little villus attachments, and those entry points underneath the microvilli are general circulatory system entry points. So the red is an artery, the blue is a vein, and the lacteals, that's your lymphatic system.
Yep.
So this
And
is the
one
end
thing-
of the, oh, go ahead, Jason.
So I was going to say one thing that's awesome about these last two slides is the brush border, and brush border sites. If maybe you can highlight that on the last little picture here. They look like little floating sea anemone when they're healthy. Like that's a picture of a healthy. And most people, they're flat because they have incompletely digested food, biofilms, and they're just sitting there. And that has a massive impact on their entire immune system. So once they start digesting their food again, also systemic enzymes, especially like serratiopeptidase, can come in and clean those little guys up and get them back floating like little sea anemone and getting the immune system talking again.
Yeah, and then to finish off that thought, if they're flattened, they also can absorb. So it doesn't matter what kind of diet someone's eating, malnourishment and deficiencies of vitamins, minerals, all the macronutrients are very possible, because if it can't get absorbed, it's going to actually get passed out to the GI system. And that's a reality. Like this one slide here gets to the whole fundamental nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do with digestion. So if we go back to the beginning, supporting the stomach, supporting the pancreas, the gallbladder, and then supporting the entire 3 segments of the small intestine, because you have different parts of the small intestine that are designed to absorb carbohydrates, fats, proteins, water-soluble vitamins, fat-soluble vitamins. It's through the entire process. So we need to make sure that it's healthy. And the number one thing that maintains its health is healthy digestion. What it does sustains it. And the thing that causes a breakdown is what gets us into this immune dysregulated, dysbiotic, pro-inflammatory state. Because as you guys know, the principal site of the immune system is in the small intestine. Why? Because it's designed to bring things into the body. So you need a surveillance system. And then we get to the colon. Oh, the poor colon gets no love because it's essentially a sewer. And it is like its job is to process waste, concentrate waste, and release things from the body. So anytime we're talking cleansing, detox, if this isn't moving, you're not really cleansing or detoxing. However, there are some other aspects that the colon does bring to the table. First and foremost is you would be surprised that a lot of mineral absorption happens in the colon. So any kind of colonic inflammation, dysbiosis can leave you mineral deficient. It also extracts a lot of water from the food contents we take in. Water is, I mean, molecularly, they say, from a weight perspective, the human body is 70 to 75% water. But from a molecular perspective, a cell is about 99% water. So the quality of the water in the foods we're eating gets reabsorbed from the colon. It's a secondary way to hydrate us. You can see how important water is. And then we know that the colon has the highest concentrations of bacteria. It's got a very thick mucus medium, and the microbiome principally, in terms of bacteria population, is housed in the colon. And when we feed those microbes the right kinds of foods, they can create the right kinds of metabolites via fermentation. They can make things like short chain fatty acids that help energy production and to maintain colonic health. They can make vitamins for us, specifically all the B vitamins and vitamin K2. And they can also create things like urolithins and secondary bile acids, which are signaling molecules that help systemic maintenance of health. And the important thing here is the colon must move to complete the digestive process. Digestion isn't done until you've pooped, in my opinion. And if we don't poop, you can assume what the downstream consequences, downstream, pun intended, consequences are. So you can see it really is, it's a seamless process from start to finish. I love this graphic because it shows you the entire way, and hopefully our organs don't look like these guys, because not many of them are happy. Look at that little gallbladder, just wants to contribute his bile and no one's letting him go. So this is what we're really looking at, guys. It's this seamless process beginning to end that digestive support supplements are really meant to help with. And we're just trying to hack, and I don't like that term biohack, but it fits. We're just trying to hack what the body can't do because of some condition that is preventing the body from having the ability to optimally digest. Typically some kind of inflammatory, energetic, immune dysfunctional problem. But there's also what people eat. Right? If you are not eating food that is serving you, you are depleting yourself of nutrition because it takes nutrient cofactors to digest properly. And if you run a deficiency, it's like trying to get rich having, a bank account that you debit far more than you credit. The body will fight back, and nutritional deficiencies are an easy line of defense to help heal things like the microvilli, as Jason mentioned, but it requires us to be able to digest to get there in the first place. So before I move to the second phase, the journey of digestion, does anyone have any questions from the first part of the series? No news is good news, or you just want me to get this over so you can stop hearing me talk.
No, I think you did a great job so far.
Thank you. My mom says I'm special. So just to kind of rehash the process in a very short bullet point format. So the process of digestion is mechanical and it's chemical. The reason we chew mechanically is so that we can allow the chemical components to be exposed to more surface area that we can then break down, absorb, and assimilate the nutrients. Very simple. Mastication is the process of chewing, and if we didn't chew, the manifestation of the statement that forever changed how I related to digestion comes true. When I was in nutrition school, I was probably 26, 27 years old, and my teacher saw me eat. She's like, God, Roland, your stomach doesn't have teeth. And I never forgot that because so many people eat like ducks. They don't chew. They just kind of gobble it down like Homer did in that episode where that reference comes from. And if you don't chew properly, the rest of the process becomes compromised because the hydrochloric acid, the bicarbonate, the enzymes, the bile do not work properly. So this very well coordinated process should also be fairly autonomous. I say to people, you should not know where your breakfast is in your GI system. You shouldn't have such extreme bloating or reflux or farting or any kind of alterations in bowel health, because that's your body screaming out to you that something is not right. And if you have digestive conditions, if you have obvious symptoms, then one thing that should be an immediate thought for any practitioner is, well, the digestive system may not be the cause of the problem, but I need to support this if I'm going to get this person better.
Yep.
The other thing that
really good case for gum chewing and why gum chewing is just like one of the worst ideas on earth.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of falsify your body's ability to think food's coming. It does throw off the digestive process if you do it
Yeah,
excessively.
throws off your thyroid, it throws off your stomach acid, you know, it's not a good idea. Gets enzymes produced when, you know, you already have them in short supply.
Tricks your vagus nerve. How awful. Gum. Avoid it, guys. It's also got food dyes and colors and all that other crap. Then there's the whole element of considering that there is a hormonal and there's a neurological component to digestion, right? So most people don't stop to think about, well, how are all these digestive secretions produced? There is an entire endocrine system in our GI systems called our enteroendocrine system. And an example of how this would work is when you swallow food, your stomach will produce a hormone called gastrin, which will immediately get sent into the bloodstream. And what it basically tells your cells to do, the cells of the stomach specifically, is to start producing hydrochloric acid. And it works in a feedback system. When the pH is elevated, more HCl is produced, and gastrin drives that process. When the pH drops, gastrin becomes inhibited. Why? Because you've already made enough HCl. You do not need to continue to do so. Now the digestive process can take place. There's also another one. When the food leaves the stomach and it goes into the small intestine, there's a hormone called CCK, and pronounced cholecystokinin 3 times fast. And what that hormone does is it tells the pancreas and the gallbladder, hey guys, it's time to produce some bile and some enzymes. Food's coming in. We need to make sure this next step of the process is facilitated. So the endocrine system gets involved in digestion. Not a lot of people think that. They think testosterone, estrogen, that's the whole gamut of the endocrine system, but we have one in our GI systems. And then there is actually the autonomic, the central, and the enteric nervous system. So nerves send communication signals back and forth to make sure that all the organs can function. So the nerves speak to the organs, the hormones signal the organs to what to do. And that's how we regulate the process of digestion via even just smelling food. Like if I say to everyone here, think about cutting into a lemon and think about what that lemon smells like and tastes like. What's the initial response the body has? Maybe none of you.
Coming.
What's that?
A food is gonna come. Food's coming.
Yeah, it's like if you really envision the taste or think about the taste of a lemon or visualize yourself cutting a lemon, your mouth starts to water a little bit.
Yeah.
So that process is part of the cephalic phase of digestion to make saliva flow. And why do you want saliva to flow? Because there's enzymes in your saliva. It signals the entire cascade that something's going to come. The other aspect is the rhythmic pulses of muscle contraction that I have in this example here. That's called peristalsis. So the nerves in the enteric nervous system regulate how those muscles can contract to move food through your GI system at a very specific speed. From start to end, swallowing to pooping, it should be anywhere between 18 and 24 hours for the average person's bowels to move at a normal pace. Does anyone know the average bowel transit time of most females in North America? Because women seem to be more digestively compromised on a regular basis than men do when they get sick. Does anyone know the average transit time?
I don't know, but I'll guess 32 hours.
Very close. You're getting all the fantasy points today. It's amazing. 30 to 36 hours. So think about that. If food sits in your colon for 30 to 36 hours, could that maybe be like you having the garbage bin just overflowing and just leaving it in your kitchen for a couple of days? Same kind of concept, right? So if there's issues with the hormones, if there's issues with the nervous system, then the digestive system becomes compromised. And that's how it fits into this whole personalized healthcare process.
And that's another real prime reason why people have to do liver cleanses over and over and over again, because their transit time is so long. The hepatoportal system has to take over and dump everything into the liver to keep you from getting furtherly ill. So then you have to cleanse your liver again. Your digestion gets sluggish, happens over and over and over and over and over again. Not to say it's not good to do liver cleanses, but a lot of people just completely don't think of digestion being related to the hepatoportal system and overwhelming the liver.
And it just goes to show you how everything really is interconnected in the body. And some clinicians get the pie in the sky idea or fixation on a certain organ or a certain process, and they never draw connections where it's a huge opportunity for them to advance as professionals, and it's a huge opportunity for their patients to actually make progress and get better, because that's what they're seeing them for. These next two slides, this one and the next one, are the two most important fundamental things to know of this entire presentation. If you know the normal digestive process, it gives you a lot greater understanding and a lot more strategic understanding of where things are meant to take place, why they happen where they do, and thirdly and ultimately, why to utilize certain digestive aid supplements in certain conditions versus others. I mean, fundamentally, if it's a stomach problem, if someone has a bacterial infection in their stomach, that's going to compromise their HCl production. So once you can clear out the H. pylori, for example, you'll need to have some HCl support in that honeymoon phase while the parietal cells come back. Hypothetically, if there is some kind of pancreatic insufficiency, then HCl might not be the problem, but digestive enzymes may become a lot more important, because we know that that process of breakdown from going from big to small, because enzymes do two things, they catalyze reactions and they break things down, that doesn't take place because there may not be enough of them, or it may be a pH problem. And if the entire digestive process is compromised, well, then number 6 doesn't actually happen properly. You don't make short chain fatty acids, you don't ferment fibers, you don't properly break down proteins, so you can become dysbiotic. So this whole thing is very much an interconnected web. And it's a lot to read, so I'm not going to go through each individual point here. You guys can read this on your free time. I would encourage it. But even number 8 there, it comes back to what Jason just says. When bacteria don't optimally ferment or make B vitamins, that actually places an increased burden on the liver to filter out some of those negative metabolites that get created. But it all starts with chewing. And if you can educate clients or doctors that, chewing, it's not going to make you more money. It's not going to be super sexy. It's boring, but it will make a massive difference. There was actually a really cool study that was done a while back, and they looked at the difference between people who chewed the same quantity calorically of food 15 times and 45 times. So let's say it was 2,000 calorie diets. They just chewed a lot more, 3 times more in the second diet. What do you think the outcome was in terms of how people fared comparatively? What do you think the main difference was in terms of what they felt when they chewed more?
Energy, more energy.
Energy,
And satiation.
much better weight.
They lost weight.
There was the whole infomercial about it. This guy had this whole program, and that's all it was chewing. He wrote a whole book about it, and tons of people got awesome results, but people just weren't patient enough to do it.
Because if you don't properly chew and break down your food, you're basically bringing an element of toxicity into your system, right? And the path to weight gain and energy dysfunction is increased toxicity, increased toxic burden, increased immune activation, increased inflammation, and the body trying to figure out how to clean all that crap up. And when it can't, getting fatter, being overweight, and lowering energy is just a compromise, because you take away from what the body can maximally produce. And then there's the individual elements of carbohydrate digestion, right? So carbohydrate digestion, protein digestion, and fat digestion are all very different. I would encourage you guys all to get familiar with these, because it gives you more bandwidth of conversation topics to have with your accounts. And most people do not remember this stuff. So you can become a reference or a resource to teach your clients how to look at the body, not to teach them the protocol, not to tell them to take 5 enzymes every time. It's teach them why digestion is important and what part of the process is essential. For example, if you don't break down carbohydrates properly with salivary enzymes and chewing, if carbohydrates, intact carbohydrates, get to the colon, well, that's a fermentable source. So when someone says, oh, sugar's bad for you, carbs are bad for you, it creates dysbiosis. Only if you don't break them down. Carbs are only a problem if certain species of bacteria get access to large molecules of sugar and they metabolize them and they eat them. Same thing with yeast infestations. Candida can only be a problem if those carbohydrates aren't properly broken down. The assumption is, oh, sugar feeds yeast. Well, yeah, but if you're inhaling 7 tablespoons of table sugar and enzymes not your problem, logic is your problem. But when it comes to feeding all these things, if you don't digest your carbohydrates properly, you can feed dysbiosis rather than the little soundbite, sugar feeds candida, sugar feeds dysbiotic bacteria. Protein digestion is very different. Where carbohydrate digestion takes place primarily in the mouth with chewing, and then after the pancreatic phase in the small intestine, if the stomach doesn't show up with HCl and pepsin, you can't denature or technically what's called hydrolyze proteins, because you want to create amino acids for absorption. And if everyone remembers from the many times that Jason and I have referenced this in the past, when it comes to leaky gut and systemic inflammation, what component of food is the real problem? Is it the carbohydrate? Is it the fat? It's the protein. Proteins are what cause immune activation when they get into the bloodstream in larger sizes than they are designed to. So when someone has leaky gut and they start drinking a lot of milk or eating a lot of yogurt and they're not able to properly break down those dairy proteins, it's those incompletely digested dairy proteins that get into the bloodstream that trigger the immune system. So the immune system goes, well, shit, this is not meant to be here. So it tags that protein and now it has a memory. You create an antibody to that incompletely digested protein. And what happens every time you eat that protein is you activate the immune system if it's not completely digested, which is why in order to benefit from an elimination diet, you're just taking the burden away. I mean, we'll use an example that Susan brought up in the beginning. The reason lectins are problematic for people is because they can't digest anything and their immune system is so compromised. If a lectin pushes you over the edge, you're not a healthy person. You have to rebuild your gut. Because the idea that a chickpea is a weapon of mass destruction is kind of ridiculous, considering nature gives it to us.
Right.
But our guts have become so compromised that chickpeas and some of these other foods are just wreaking havoc on us in small little drips and drabs. It's the dose makes the poison. So if I'm incredibly dairy sensitive, which I am, if I have too much dairy, I get congested. Accumulation of mucus is inflammation. That's my response. So I've still not, fully resensitized myself to dairy. But, drinking whey protein for 10 straight years is probably something to do with it.
Right.
And then there's fat digestion. Fat digestion isn't actually understood nearly as well because it kind of skirts a line between carbohydrate and protein digestion. What I mean by that is there's a little bit of digestion on the initial mechanical breakup. There's a little bit further that happens in the stomach, but most of it happens after bile is mixed with the fats. So fats need bile to be emulsified. Imagine like you have this big globule of fat and bile just brings off these little fat drops and driplets. And that's what the enzymes start to break down. And the difference is if it's a long chain fatty acid, it gets digested and brought into the lymphatic system. If it's a short or a medium chain fatty acid, it gets brought directly through the digestive lining of the small intestine. This is why people say, well, MCTs are in instant energy. It's because they're digested far more quickly than long chain fats like you would find in olive oil or beef or salmon, like a fish oil. So they can be used for energy really, really quickly. It's why short chain fatty acids and medium chain fats do really well in a low carb diet because they get converted to energy and ketones really quickly. But if someone's not breaking their fats down, if they're not emulsifying fats with bile and enzymes, what happens to the food in your digestive system? Shoots through you like a Japanese bullet train.
Yeah.
Hey, what?
It shoots through you like you will spray the back of the toilet with
Right, exactly.
Fundamentally. It will be oily. You will have oily floating stools. Steatosis, right?
Yeah.
So in the worst case scenario, you're going to have it's going to be like, oh, it was a massacre in there. We lost a lot of good men. That's the worst case. The best case is just like a submarine that just won't dive.
Right.
But again, these are signs and symptoms. We laugh. They're signs and symptoms of your body trying to tell you these processes aren't working well. So
well,
where does that leave us?
To take a step back to the fat digestion, this is something that comes up a lot with practitioners. Like, what's the best oil to take? In my mind, the best oil to take is a well-made parental oil, but most people are not healthy enough to handle that. So that a step below that is going to be something like a fish oil, and then below that is an MCT. But what ultimately I think is for your digestion is ideal, but parental oil is going to be the best bet because they can withstand the heat of your cell and never go rancid, where fish oil over time will rancidify your cell. So
The parental oil, like what's an example of that?
Cold pressed flax?
Seed oil. Yeah, cold pressed flax oil.
Okay.
But if someone's got compromised fat digestion, they
it's the
probably
worst thing you can
only
give them. Yeah.
tolerate MCT.
Yeah.
Which is,
Exactly.
something we can chat about like on a non-call one time. It is a cool
Yeah.
concept,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
But you can see what Jason's bringing up. There's a really good observation that if someone can't tolerate these foods, then you know where the compromised state of digestion lies. It's asking the questions that kind of tease out all the little tidbits of information. So as I was saying, where does that leave us? Well, we have a lot of different products, and without a shadow of a doubt, we have the best products when it comes to digestive support on the market. You guys all know that. That's why you're here. I want to arm you with the necessary background knowledge to know how to use them more strategically in terms of selling the concept or the idea to someone. Because Digeszyme and Digeszyme Plus, I wanted to label them so it gives you a frame of reference. We know that the pH range is there. There's 23 individual enzymes, different kinds of lipases, amylase, which are carbohydrate, and proteases, as well as fiber digesting enzymes and what have you. This is the great digestive insurance policy. And the analogy I use is every time I rent a car, I get the insurance. Why? Because if I feel like jumping that car off of, I don't know, the highway just to see what would happen, I'm covered. Same reason you can go to a restaurant. Do I want to eat a double cheeseburger? Well, here goes 4 Digeszyme Plus, say a Hail Mary or an Amen or whatever, and see what happens. But the Digeszyme and the Digeszyme Plus are the professional products, right? They have double the enzymes of Enzalase. I would say the Digeszyme is entry-level professional. What I mean by that, it's not worse, it's just half the dose. Some people should start there. Digeszyme Plus is what I give my athletes. Why? Because they need to eat more food than the average person. So every time you eat, it's an opportunity for you not to digest. That's how I look at that. And then it comes back to this concept of ubiquitous support. I love that word ubiquitous because it explains everything I want in a single statement. If you support digestion, there is not one negative consequence to the rest of your health. Improving digestion will improve every other aspect of your health. Doesn't matter what condition you're working on. Cancer. It's like someone says, oh, well, the digestive enzyme help if I'm on chemotherapy. Shit, yeah, it will. Does anyone know what chemo does? It stops your cells from dividing. What are the fastest replicating cells in the body? The GI cells. They replicate every 3 to 5 days. So chemo is likely going to give you some degree of leaky gut. So you need to support digestion. My computer just told me my battery's running low, so I'm going to rip through the rest of this before I just drop off.
Oh, is that yours or mine? I thought it was mine.
That was me.
Okay. All right.
Jason, jump in for a quick sec. I'm going to try to find a plug.
Okay. All right. So actually, this is a perfect product for JT to go through since he formulated it, and talk about how one of the reasons, JT, we like to highlight this for the the keto diet person.
Well, this particular enzyme was created by Randy to take your food and turn it into more probiotic compatible enzymes. It's not as complete as Digeszyme and Digeszyme Plus, but it also has sodium alginate in it and the Enzystim. And there's a couple of reasons for those things. Some enzymes are partially denatured by stomach acid. Lipase is one in particular that's partially denatured. Now, what does partial mean? In between 40 and 60%, 70%. So the sodium alginate delivers these things through the stomach, which means it is probably not as good at protein digestion as Digeszyme and Digeszyme Plus, because those don't have that ability. They're not being taken through the stomach acid. And the Enzystim is an emulsifier. It functions a lot like bile. It emulsifies fats and waters. But this was designed so that we could very high lipase, high fiber digesting enzyme. Fibers are food for bacteria, and they don't do us any good. And then the high lipase to break down the coating. So if you're eating a salad, for instance, and you have a salad dressing on there, you're coating everything in fat. And so you need to have the fat to break it apart so that the fiber digesting enzymes can find their substrates to work on. That was the primary goal of Enzalase when we first created it.
And I do use this even with my practitioners who have patients without gallbladders. I have them take this along with Digeszyme Plus. Or if someone's really gallbladder compromised, I'll have them take this with Digestion Plus till we can get their gallbladder back to spec.
And then we have our good old HCl. Thank you for that, guys. It was perfect timing. Go team. We know from what we covered today, this is really focusing on protein digestion and the assistance of that. And that is the first step of what determines the subsequent second, third, fourth, fifth steps of the cascade. There is this thing that goes around. I put this article here for you all to look at. I personally don't abide by the HCl challenge test. I think it's ridiculous and stupid and short-sighted. Because people always want to know, well, how much HCl do you give? My bias is less is more, and you start there, but you encourage the doctor, the practitioner, whomever, to take their own position, or at least have their clients do their own testing. I'll give you an example. I have a client who just went through a course of antibiotics, and she's on Theralac Pro. So I want to replete. So I told her, start with 2 tonight. Let me know how you feel. Text me. Let's see how you respond. Go up to 3. Let's see how you respond. I'm going to go individual because that's what I believe patient care is. There is no HCl dose. Some people do fine with 1. Most people who are healthy do just fine with 1 capsule of HCl. That's what the bottle says. Sometimes you may need 2 or 3. But if someone says, well, how much of this do I take? It's like, well, you're the doctor. That's your job. That's what you get paid for. So same thing with enzymes. Less is more. You start with 1. Digestive and Digestive Plus are quite powerful. And they have a full complement of enzymes that likely has enough adequacy in 1 capsule to facilitate replacing what's missing in your average healthy person. If you're going to go to a steakhouse, and, you know, Larry, Bethany, and I did this in Texas where we went to a Brazilian grill. You best believe all the US Enzymes products found their way to the table. And thank God that when the wheelbarrow came to take us out, at least we felt good because we were digesting our food. So again, to take a look at that article, because a lot of physicians and practitioners out there still use the HCl challenge. Familiarize yourself with it and where the shortcomings are. And then put the onus back on the doctor to go, hey, it's your choice. I can give you some insights as to what I may think, but ultimately I don't want to tell you how much to take. And the last one here is glutathione. So we've talked about this before for other conditions. Yes, for blood sugar regulation and diabetics who are on DPP4 inhibitors, people who have gluten and casein allergies taken on an empty stomach can help with the central nervous system. That's outside of the scope of what we're talking about today. This was designed to assist with gluten residues. You cannot go for pizza and be totally fine if you take 12 of these. You've missed the entire point of what this does, because the gluten protein is a sequencing of amino acids that cannot be properly broken down by the enzymes the human body creates. It does not have the ability to digest North American gluten very well. Jason in Europe is in a different ball game. If I go to Europe, I eat bread and I'm cool. If you're not in a ball game, you're more of like a clog contest, some kind of Dutch dancing.
Yeah, right. It is one nice thing. It can actually eat bread and feel like tons of energy.
You can eat the bread, yeah, and get some good energy from it, yeah?
I can, yeah, go on a cycle ride.
But fundamentally, what glutathione is doing is it's helping digest the proline-rich residues, the glycine-proline residues that the human body doesn't have an enzyme to split. So if you go out to a restaurant and you have some teriyaki salmon, for example, and that soy sauce is gluten-based soy sauce, it's probably going to assist you in not having a negative consequence. Who is this most impactful for? People with celiac disease, because they're the ones who have the flattened out microvilli from an autoimmune-like reaction. But this doesn't mean that the average person will benefit from taking one of these with a Digestive Plus, with an HCl zyme when they go out to eat. Because if you don't prepare your food, you don't know what's in it. And cross-contamination, even of gluten-free foods, is very high. The likelihood of being exposed to gluten residues, even if the pan or the spatula or something was in touch with it, like if you use a butter knife that was used to spread butter on bread and you cut a piece of fruit with it, theoretically you might have some gluten residues in your apple. That's what this product is designed for. It's not designed to make you Superman and have the ability to digest gravel and you go, ha ha ha, gluten can't do anything to me. It's not what it was for. Anything to add about this one, Jason?
Well, the key reason for this is the cross-contamination. That is the #1 reason. And it's also there So you don't have to be a jerk at Christmas time when Aunt Betty spent 3 days making this special pie and, sorry, I can't have that,
Dude, you just give it to the dog under the table. Aunt Betty's so slow, she won't notice anything anymore.
But I would say if you do eat that pie, just don't take it just that day. You're going to need to probably take it for a good couple of days in a row.
And with that, guys, I don't know if you heard this one, but I heard it was really funny. And I'm done.